Hey everyone, and welcome to Chapter 2 of the Pre-Algebra program. In this first section, we're going to talk about integers and absolute value. We are going to define integers, interpret integer phrases, graph integers on a number line, write inequalities using integers, define absolute value, and evaluate expressions using absolute value. So right here, I have for you two definitions: integers, which are all positive and negative whole numbers, and zero. And then we also have absolute value, which is the positive of any number. So I would encourage you to just stop the video for a moment and write all of this down in your notebook. And once you've done that, then continue. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about is identifying integers. So an example would be a bank withdrawal of $50. And we want to know what integer would represent that. So now we're looking at both the positive numbers, which you're used to working with, and also negative numbers, which you probably don't have much experience with, and that's okay. We're going to get lots and lots of practice with it this chapter. But when you're taking a loss or losing something or dropping in temperature, those types of things are represented with a negative number. So in this case, the negative 50 would be the number represented by a bank withdrawal of $50. Similarly, if I had something like a salary increase of $100, now that represents a positive net gain. And so that number represented there would simply be 100. So when we're talking about loss, then that's represented by a negative. When we're talking about gain, then that number is represented by a positive. Okay, now we're going to graph some of these on number line. So hopefully you are familiar with the number line. However, you might not have seen it to include the negative values. And this is something that I want you to get lots and lots of practice drawing this chapter. We're going to utilize this for nearly every question that we answer, for the beginning part of this chapter anyway. And I don't really want you to attempt to answer the questions without the number line until the end of the chapter, when we've exhibited mastery of these concepts. So you might be tempted to jump ahead and think that you know how the numbers go, but I'm telling you, a lot of students get into trouble when they stop using the number line. So let's familiarize ourselves with it with this example. We want to graph -6, -2, and 3. And you can see that we've done that here. Here is our -6. It's to the left of the 0. And notice that although the numbers themselves look like they're going in ascending order, the bigger they get negative, actually the smaller the number. And so then we have -2 here, closer to 0. And then when we want just 3, hopefully we know how to graph just 3. It's over there to the right of 0. So positive numbers here are to the right of 0, and negative numbers here are to the left of 0. So we want to practice writing this any chance that we can. And I'm going to give you some more examples here. Let's talk about writing inequalities using integers, specifically negative integers. Let's use the example, a temperature of -2 is warmer than -14. And those of you here in the Midwest can probably relate to this. -2 is slightly warmer than -14. But if we wanted to write that as an inequality, remember what our signs are for inequality. It's the greater than or less than signs. So we want to write -2 is bigger than -14. All right, let's do another one. A temperature of 3 is colder than 20. So again, we recognize that 3 is less than or colder than 20, so we would write it as 3 less than 20. All right, very good. One other thing that we want to talk about in this section here is absolute value. And remember back in your definition that the absolute value is the positive of any number. And if we already have a positive number, then it just simply stays the same. So that makes our life really easy. But say we have a negative inside those absolute values. Well, then that value becomes the positive. So there are no negatives that exist when we take the absolute value. Unless, of course, that the negative actually appears on the outside of the absolute value. So if I have a situation like this, where I want the negative of the absolute value of -3, well, what that means is I'm going to keep that negative on the outside, and then when I take the absolute value of -3, I simply get 3, because this is the positive of -3. And then I apply the negative on the outside. So my value here is -3, but not because there was a negative inside the absolute value. It's negative because we had an additional negative sign on the outside, which we applied at the end. Let me give you another example like that. What if I have negative absolute value of 5? Well, again, I take the positive of what's in there, and it's already positive, which is 5, and then I apply my negative. So you always want to do the absolute value first, then apply the negative on the outside if you have one. All right, the very last thing we're going to do here is we're going to evaluate some expressions just like we did in the first chapter, but now, of course, we have some negatives. So I just want to do one example. You should be familiar with this. We worked on it quite a bit last chapter, but I just want you to see how that might work with absolute values and all sorts of integers. So let's say I have a equals 1, b equals -2, and c equals 4. And I want to take the absolute value of b minus the product of a and c. All right, this is using a lot of things we did last chapter, so hopefully this will be a good review for you too. Okay, remember whenever we make the replacement, we're going to put in parentheses. And I'm going to replace 1 for a and 4 for c. So I'm going to do my absolute values first, and the absolute value of -2 is 2. Now remember, my order of operations tells me I need to multiply first before I subtract. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 4, and then I'll be ready for my final subtraction, 2 minus 4. Now, again, jump on your number line, and I want you to start at 2, and when we take away 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we get -2. We're going to learn more about this skill in the next couple of sections, so do your best now, and don't worry, we'll get extensive practice at it in a couple of sections. So at this point, I want you to finish up your notes, open your book, read the section and all of the examples, and begin your assignment.